So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what we know about cross-sector collaboration, as opposed to sort of regular collaboration that we talk about in our systems. And so I'd like to start with just some common ground around shared language. Often, we use words like collaboration, cooperation, co-creation a lot, but we don't always go back to like, well, what do we mean when we say this? What does it look like? What's the difference between cooperation and collaboration? Those kinds of things. So just to put out there that these are some of the themes we're gonna be exploring today. I put trust, sharing, and curiosity on here. I think that there's something about sort of explicit sharing of information and ideas, transparency, vulnerability, that all impacts trust. And then, of course, curiosity, because if we weren't sort of curious about how to make things better, it wouldn't drive us so much probably to work together. So again, as far as sort of language goes, I'm through the next few slides when I'm speaking about cross-sector collaboration. I'm talking about really, fairly intense long-term interactions across organizations from at least two sectors. So again, we've got, a lot of different sectors that we can think about. Right now, we're doing some pretty cool collaboration across sectors in CAMS, in children and adolescent mental health, and that's reaching across health, social care, pediatrics, psychiatry, education, law enforcement, voluntary sector, lived experience organizations. So that's, there we've got lots and lots of actors, and we're aiming at addressing a social or environmental problem. And environmental can obviously be culture as well, or social. The other sort of aims is that there's some specific goals. Often I think in the improvement world, we talk about just improving our relationships or improving outcomes for patients, but we don't or people in our communities, but we don't always get as specific as we might. And sometimes that's where collaboration can help to focus that lens so that there's really meaningful impact. I think of cross-sector collaboration as a social innovation. I think that, we're in this digital world where it is a lot easier for us to connect in a lot of ways, but then, and a lot easier for us to be inclusive in our collaboration, I think is the key for me as far as big changes, instead of sort of in past, sort of in past times, it might have been a few leaders at the top meeting together quarterly, having a discussion and calling that cross-sector collaboration. But I think we can amplify our efforts and our outcomes if we really think about it on multiple levels, which we'll kind of go through here today. And then the last bullet here says ethical mandate and responsibility. And I really believe firmly in this, that we're here as helpers, whatever sector we come from. So we're all part of the helping professions, the caring professions. And I think that, again, if we have a responsibility to work together in order to make things better. I'm preaching to the choir here, I am sure, but it's that mindset of together we can achieve things that none of us can do alone. So, in our different silos, we just can't do as much as we can when we work together. So in these slides and the slides that are going to be shared with you on the future site, there are links at the bottoms of my slides to all the resources that I've drawn from. So all of the studies, and so I just want to just point that out so that you can do a little bit more digging later, because I'm sure you'll be curious. So this study particularly is one I really like, and it was a meta study of a literature review and sort of meta-analysis of different pieces of research. And 5 key factors emerged by the authors while they were doing their research around what are those key factors in cross-sector collaboration. And so down the left side, you'll see understanding prior initiatives in the environment. So to me, this is context, right? So knowing what people have done before, what have we tried, what hasn't worked, what has worked. What's the environment we're working in? What are the networks that exist? I think this is where often stakeholder mapping comes in as a really important activity that collaboratives can undertake together as an exercise. Powerful sponsors. Often when we try to help folks with cross-sector collaboration, we come up against barriers where the sponsors haven't stepped into their leadership space of really helping to move things forward, or they just say, great, get on with it, collaborate. But then the folks who are sort of doing the do need that permission and that air cover to say, yep, the decisions you're making in this collaborative, we want you to enact them. So I'd really emphasizing action here in these slides over just collaborating to discuss. Developing effective processes, structures, and governance mechanisms. This is all about decision-making. How are decisions made? How is agreement formed? There are lots of different kinds of negotiation techniques where you can figure out how to create those win-wins for everyone. We talk about what's consensus look like. Is it majority rules? So those are some of the really core things to think about, and knowing that folks who have leadership, power can take ideas forward from the collaborative to enact them. Because one of the most important things about cross-sector collaboration is demonstrating the impact and demonstrating action. Otherwise, people in collaboratives tend not to stick around if they don't see the fruits of what they're doing come to fruition. Understanding roles of key actors. We know that in teams, in any team, role clarity is really important, and it is no less so important in cross-sector collaboration. So it's that sort of who's doing what, who's holding power, and I think it's important. I love this bit here about the main locus of power will shift, and sometimes it follows a funding source, and those are where we get into, again, decisions about governance, outcomes and accountability that say, what are we going to do about shared resource, right? So are we just going to talk about the way social care and healthcare interact as an example, or are we actually going to talk about sharing assets? And that's, I think we've got a really great opportunity with the ICS system now and the ICBs to do some of that hard discussion and really putting our money where our mouths are. Demonstrating leadership, key competencies. I think that's an obvious one. I like that there needs to be cross-boundary and multi-level leadership as a result of these studies that looked at what factors really create impact. And then I think what's also important is this key competencies, right? So one of the factors when you look at collaboration across sectors, say in tech or in software development, it's really leveraging the strengths of the different players, the different stakeholders, and knowing that you might not be so good at something, but somebody else in the collaborative is good at it. And so it's leveraging those strengths. And sometimes that means acknowledging when someone doesn't have the competency and that might be you, to say, you know what, this is not an area I'm an expert in, but let's look to the genius of the collaborative to find out who does. And lastly, but definitely not least, is creating an outcome-oriented accountability system. So I always joke, I use this word accountability buddy, because I think sometimes accountability it's got a negative connotation, like it's evaluation or holding someone accountable. But really, this is about self-accountability, organizational accountability. And if we are all focused on that vision of working together toward a common good, then I expect people to be my accountability buddies and say, hey, Jen, you said you were going to bring that stuff to the next meeting. Did you bring it? Do you need help gathering that? Because we don't want to let each other down, because we're really interdependent is what we are. So again, that's a whole great study. It's linked in the future space. I really recommend looking into it. Oh, there we go. I was going to highlight that last one. So this next little bit that I would really encourage you to look into, if you haven't already, this is a great report by the Health Foundation, Cross-Sector Working to Support Large-Scale Change. It's a nice piece Again, just recommend you look into it. But they've really broken it down into these sort of 4 areas, these 4 buckets, if you will: leadership and vision, culture and attitudes, staff roles and training, and infrastructure and processes. And so I think those are 4 simple categories that are that can be really helpful to think about. Again, we see some of these themes coming up that were present in the last slide, especially around, I like the one that says avoiding jurisdictional battles, right? So that's about stepping back and saying, you know, what are we trying to achieve together? And sometimes we've got to park some of our personal agendas or organizational agendas in order to really open our minds to different ways of thinking. That doesn't mean we don't, you know, still align with our agendas, but in order to really open up our thinking, we've got to try to set that aside. And that's not easy. We have unconscious bias getting in the way. We have that whole like, well, we didn't invent, we want to invent it here and not borrow from elsewhere. But we've got to get past those fixed mindsets about what sharing looks like in communities if we're going to make progress. And so I think those infrastructure and processes tips on the right side can be really helpful. Again, I think when I ask people in our systems what they really want, all of them say the same thing: time. And, you know, that's something that we need to address together, because as we know, the people in our systems are really highly burned out. And in order to, again, it's sort of lighten the load for everyone. Our leaders and our organizational leaders, our system leaders have to make sure that we're able to do that, to free up our bandwidth, so to speak. So what I would encourage you to do is think about right now in your own organization or in your own team, how would you rate yourself in these areas as far as readiness to collaborate? So I think of a 1 as like, or I suppose I should say, I think of the 2 as like, okay, we've got this, it's in hand. We're maybe not excelling at it, but we've got it in hand. A 1 would be, we've started talking about this, but we're really not acting, or it's not clear, right? So we say we have a clear vision and shared goals. Where are they? Are they written down? Is it visible? Are roles and responsibilities clear for people as they're working together? It's one thing to say, here's your roles, and they should be clear, but whether or not people have internalized that and transferred that into their own sort of mindsets is a different thing entirely. In education, we always say, it doesn't matter if you taught it, what matters is if they learned it. So we can say things till we're blue in the face, but unless people really have internalized what it means, then it can really still be a struggle. I also think that other one, addressing challenges to professional identity. This is something we explored last year. We were doing some collaboration for professional leadership framework development, and really thinking about, you know, we all have a very strong identity in our professions. And so we have to think about that strong professional identity, but also what is our professional identity as a group, and how do we sort of, you know, acknowledge that that people are coming from different mindsets and different perspectives, and that's practiced perspective taking, really. So I want to just take some of that research and put it into a couple of different frames for you to think through as far as how you might take what we know through research works and like, what does it look like though in your practice? And Juliet, can you give me a time check? Is that, I feel like.
Yeah, you've got 4 minutes left.
Yeah, that's great. Plenty of time. So what I like about this one is we know that we've got to have vision. The why, we always hear this sort of start with why, but the what and the how are really important too. And that's where strategy and tactics come in. I really would encourage you to look into what futures thinking looks like about setting goals and setting vision. So often I hear this phrase, the art of the possible, but I'd like to shift our thinking into the art of the plausible, because I think it really helps us to focus in groups as far as moving towards goals to be achieved. So that's something else we could explore. But in a nutshell, and in sort of the simplest way possible, the first thing we do is we need to define our outcome and our metrics of success if we are working in a collaborative. What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to know we did it? So we can't just say something like improve the lives of people in our communities. Well, exactly what does that look like, and how are we going to know if we achieve it? And it's only by doing that and that backwards design that we can identify our vision and our strategy. But just as importantly, we have to talk about our shared expectations. And so what that means is that our tactics, the do that comes from the strategy, is bound by the way we act together in a group. So we cannot ignore questions like, how are we going to communicate? How often are we going to communicate? Who's going to hold decision-making power? How are we going to agree when decisions are made? That's that rules of engagement that's so important. You can have the best strategy in the world, but as we know, culture will eat that for breakfast. So again, lots of open communication. I know I'm coming up to time here, so I am going to just take a look at my slides and see what I want to highlight, and then just know that, thank you, but just know that, again, I'm more than happy to discuss this with folks who want to get in a little bit more deeply, but I think we throw around the word co-creation a lot. And there are actually lots of different ways of doing that. So one is a crowd of people. This is great for crowdsourcing, but it can take a long time. Community of practice or community of kindred spirits. It's good for groups to leverage complementary expertise. Oops. The next one is the club of experts. This one's particularly good when you've got to do something quickly. You can use like Delphi model decision making to help that. And then finally, a coalition. And I really think a coalition is best for groups who are willing to do that shared investment. So again, putting our resources where our mouths are. And last but not least, this will be my, I'll probably call this my final slide here. But we adore Amy Edmondson's work. If you're into psychological safety, you'll know who she is. But she has a great book called Extreme Teaming: Lessons in Complex Cross-Sector Leadership. And these are 4 of her big tips. I love this first one: build an adaptable vision. Absolutely, you need a vision, but as you move through collaboration, you're going to learn things that are going to ask you to reshape your vision. And that's right. So you can't be so unwavering that you can't change the vision if that's what is called for by the people you're trying to serve. Cultivating psychological safety, of course. I like this: facilitating and insisting on knowledge sharing. Just don't make it an option. It has to be something that everyone's accountable for. And then empower execution as learning. So that's action learning. So let's not just sit around and talk. Let's actively try. We go back, we test things, we come back together, and we discuss. So I said it would be my last slide, but it's not. This is the very last one. And this just is saying that, you know, if we're going to innovate in a system, across our systems, I think of all of our community as one system, we have to adopt some dispositions and really live them. So perspective taking, if we're not actively looking through other people's lenses, then we are not allowing ourselves to activate that sort of the magic that happens when people come together in communities. And I've put action in all caps just to hit that one home, that you can move through all the steps on this sort of on this visual. You can create, you know, you can find insights, you can connect insights to find wisdom, but unless you act, there will be no impact.